I'm sitting here in a hotel room in Los Angeles, looking out of the window to the runway of Los Angeles Airport. I shouldn't be here now. I should be in Australia, in Melbourne, for a multi-city speaking tour. I've been to Australia many times, in fact 10 times since 1997, without any problem with the events, nothing. I was given a visa for this speaking tour by the government in September last year. But the reason that I'm sitting here and not sitting in Australia now should chill to the bone every Australian, because it is testament to what that country, like so many others, has become: an Orwellian tyranny. We were given the visa in September, and so all the arrangements began. Booking venues, booking hotels, booking flights. And in this period, since the autumn of last year, there has been no indication whatsoever from the Australian government that there was going to be a problem. There was no indication until about 4 hours before we were due to get on the flight at the airport to Melbourne. So the very fact that the government revoked my visa on the grounds that I'll come to, which is why it's so sinister for every Australian, the very fact that it was revoked is outrageous. But the fact that they left it, and clearly, systematically, coldly and calculatedly left it until 4 hours before the plane left, shows how calculated this has all been. So, what happened, and why am I not now in Australia? There began a campaign, and you know, it's incredibly ironic. You know, these people who call me this and call me that, then act in ways that prove me right. I'm saying that, for instance, countries like Australia are one-party states, in that the real choice between parties for government is only illusory, and basically they're one political class with basically one agenda. So it started when a Labour candidate, what was his name, this Labour candidate, Josh Burns, just very shortly, not that long ago, what would it be, maybe a week or two, that's all, he went public saying that I should not be allowed to come and speak into Australia and speak to Australians on the basis of freedom of speech and freedom of choice of what people want to hear and not hear. He didn't want that to happen, Josh Burns, because obviously has absolute contempt for basic human freedoms. People who are thinking of voting for this guy, wherever he's standing, might just take that on board before doing so. And this Josh Burns of the Labour Party, it takes a lot for me to fall off the chair in shock these days, because I've seen pretty much everything. But when this guy comes out and says David Icke is campaigning for Holocaust denial to be taught in schools, that is a shocker even for me. I've heard it all, but that was a new one. And of course it's pulled out the air, and it's a blatant lie. But then again, he's a politician, so you expect it. And in the background, with him, and the foreground too, eventually, was an organization called the Anti-Defamation Commission. This is a man and a dog organization. And let's put this into perspective, and let's put what is happening here into perspective. The Jewish population of Australia is 0.4%. This Anti-Defamation Commission, this man and a dog organization, will not represent more than a tiny handful of that 0.4%. But in league with this Josh Burns and others, and another lady who was claimed on Twitter in the wake of the visa being revoked, who's claimed that she was actively responsible for it, is a Jewish lawyer called Kate Ashmore from Victoria, who is apparently going to stand in the next election as a Liberal candidate. Like I say, one-party state, both of which have absolute contempt for the basic freedoms of the Australian people. So they then start putting out all this misinformation, character assassination. It's ironic, isn't it? The number of times you come across organisations that call themselves anti-defamation, and their modus operandi is to go around defaming everyone. And we have anti-hate groups that go around, and their modus operandi is seeking to get the public to hate their targets. I mean, it's just an Orwellian inversion. So they're campaigning for me to not be allowed into Australia. This anti-defamation mob were claiming that I'm a Holocaust denier. I'm not. Absolutely unspeakable things happened to Jewish people in Nazi Germany, and I don't want Nazis to, and that Nazi mentality, to take the bloody world over, so we see that kind of tyranny again. But this is the irony. My God, there are so many. What do tyrannies like Nazis do? And like Stalinist Russia? What's the first thing they do when they get any power? They silence any opposition. They silence any questioning of what they want the public to believe. They ban their public meetings. They burn their books. This is what Nazis do. This is what Stalinists do, and other tyrannies. What do the people who claim to be anti-Nazi and anti-hate, what do they do in relation to people like me? They want to ban my public meetings and stop my information circulating. Exactly the modus operandi of Nazis and Stalinists and tyrannies in their multiple forms and names. But they're not self-aware enough to realize that they are behaving in precisely the way they claim to be opposing. Because this is not about protecting Jewish people from criticism. It's a protection racket for the far-right regime in Israel. That's what it is. Anyone that criticizes the fact that Palestinian kids are having their legs blown off by snipers at long distance these days is an anti-Semite. And you criticize Israel in any way and you're an anti-Semite. It's the protection racket. So this has nothing to do with protecting Jewish people. This is why Jewish people that criticize Israel, they are more vehemently attacked and abused by the protection racket than even non-Jewish people. Because it's not about Jewish people, see. It's about silencing criticism of a far-right regime in Israel. So, this other irony is that if I'd have said before this happened that a tiny, tiny number of people, a handful, had the power in Australia to dictate to the government who is allowed to come into the country, who the population of Australia are allowed to hear if they choose to. If I said that a tiny, tiny handful of people had the power and influence to decide what the Australian population could choose to see and hear or not, you know what the people have said about me? The very people, actually, who've done it. They'd say, that was an anti-Semitic trope. It's an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. That's what you get all the time. Except, it's just happened. Like I say, they keep proving me right while abusing me and saying it's not true. And so what's happened is an immigration minister called David Coleman, who obviously has the backbone of a jelly, bowed to this pressure and sent me a statement, quite a long one, explaining why he revoked my visa just hours before I was due to get on the plane, having been given it last September. And he admits quite openly in this document that I have been to Australia to speak 10 times before since 1997. And he admits in the document quite openly that there has never been a problem, there has never been an incident, and I've never broken any Australian law. But on the basis of pressure from this, count them on one hand group, across party lines, one party state, he decided that I would be banned from speaking in Australia, and that the thousands of people in Australia that have bought tickets, who had chosen in what is perceived to be, but of course it clearly isn't, a free country, what they have chosen to hear, and just then make their mind up what they think of it. That's called freedom. He, Mr. Coleman, has such contempt for the freedom of Australians, and is so influenced by this handful of people that he makes a decision that announces, in terms of what he said to me in black and white, that Australia is not a free country, it's a tyranny. It's a tyranny where the government decides what the people can and cannot choose to hear. And from what I understand, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, is handling this situation personally, from what I hear. So let's just put this into perspective, and then I'm going to go on to something else, which in many ways is even more sinister in terms of Australia. But let's put this into perspective. I'm a guy coming up 67 now. I live in a one-bedroom flat on the Isle of Wight in England, where I've lived since the turn of the millennium, basically. I'm a member of no organisation. I'm a member of no movement. I live my life as an individual, doing individual research and communicating that research as an individual. But we've reached the point, and let's just, before I even say that, just remember what I was at the start, when I started coming out with things that challenge the norms that people are told to believe in. I was mad. I was a lunatic. I was the guy everyone should laugh at. That's what I was then. So, oh, he's not dangerous, he's just bloody mad. But as what I put out, again and again through the 90s and right up to present day, in book after book and talk after talk around the world, where there's never been a problem anywhere, by the way. They can't even point to other places where there's been a problem, never mind Australia. But as I've put this information out, and people have started to realise, hold on a minute, that crazy bloke, he's turning out to be right. What he said was the plan is happening. And my books from the 1990s are now being read on the television news in terms of changes in society. And thousands of people are now going, hold on a minute, what else is this bloke saying? Now, I'm no longer mad, because obviously, you know, that doesn't work anymore. I'm now dangerous. This is what Coleman gave as the reason, and there was another two, which I'm going to come to, which I say is even more sinister in many ways. This is the reason that he gave for revoking my visa at the last minute. That I was a risk to the health, safety, or good order, what the bloody hell does that mean, good order, of the Australian community, or a segment of the Australian community. And we know what he's talking about there, obviously, because of the people that have pressured him in his wavering jelly backbone state to stop me speaking and to have contempt for the freedom of Australians. Well, how funny that I've spoken 10 times in Australia since 1997 and none of that has ever been a problem. 'Cause it's made up. Any excuse will do. And these other 2 points he makes in his statement, justifying or not banning me from Australia, is my views on vaccinations and global warming. Just ponder on that, Australia. That someone who has a different view of vaccinations to the pharmaceutical cartel that makes it billions and billions and billions in profits from vaccinations. Someone who has a different view of vaccinations to that. He's banned from a country in the Commonwealth so that he cannot express those views. Ponder on the fact that someone, like many scientists, by the way, doesn't accept the official story of global warming. And because of that, the Australian government says you can't come in to Australia and give your view. Well, another fantastic irony is that I had no intention of talking about the Jewish community or Zionism in these talks. I was not intending to talk about vaccines or global warming. But it doesn't matter because they're just excuses. But this is the point. Just think, Australia and the world in general, what that says about your country, what that says about your freedom, that someone is banned from entering your land because they are saying things the government doesn't agree with. That is an Orwellian tyranny. And because the Liberal Party in government, Morrison, Coleman, and the Labour Party, supposed to be the opposition. I mean, just throw that in for a bit of light relief, are basically both supporting my ban for these reasons. So when you vote, you basically have no choice, because you're voting for one of two faces or two masks on the same tyranny, who have contempt for the basic human freedoms of the Australian population. And you can shake your head and walk away. You can ignore it. Some who also have contempt for freedom will cheer it. Nothing like as many as this rabble think, though. Or you, as an Australian people, can let this be a catalyst to understand that the Orwellian tyranny is not some concept. It's not sometime over the rainbow. It's here and it's now, and I, at this point, am a very clear and obvious example that Australians live in a tyranny. And this is the point which I've been trying to get across and have got across to so many people over the years. If you don't like where it is now, well, strap in, because this is only where it is now. This is not where it's meant to end. It's me today banned from the country for having different views to the bloody government and the political class of both parties. But the next stage, and it's already happening, is that Australians living in Australia will not be able to have views and express views that are outside of what the government says is okay. This is Australia, not China. And the Australian population need to get their asses in gear while they still can and head this off by saying we're not having it. What kind of Australia are your kids going to live in, given the way it's going? How many people could look their kids in the eye and say, yeah, I'm doing my best for you? Well, on one level you might be, but what kind of world are they going to live in? What kind of Australia are they going to live in if this is allowed to pass on the other side of the street? What about the grandkids? What Australia are they going to live in? This is a catalytic moment. It's a very sinister and it's a very dark moment in Australia's history because of what it says about where Australia now is in relation to its ruling class imposing its will on the population. There's a petition going around. If you go to davidicke.com, you'll be able to sign it. Some Australians have put this petition together to demand that I be allowed in the country. But what we're looking at, ironically, is what I've been warning about for 30 years. The plan to delete freedom of speech so that only the government version of everything can be ever heard or ever expressed. And when I look, talking this vaccination nonsense from these people, when I see governments not respecting the right of parents and not respecting the right of people to decide what goes into their body or not, and says we're taking your benefits away if you don't have your children vaccinated, What kind of tyranny is that? And put that together with what's just been done to me. The population of Australia is not large by the size of the land, obviously. But it needs to understand that its country is being controlled by a ridiculously few people. And they do not have your interests at heart, whatever party they may claim to represent. What's that line I hear? Great little ditty song. Come on, Aussie, come on. Come on, Aussie, come on. Get off your frickin' knees while you still can.